Great.
Okay, let's just pick up where we left off. If you're just tuning in, you missed the first 10 minutes, and you can just go to the video page on NuMundo and check that out, see what you missed. Here with Sarah Wu, permaculturist, herbalist, world traveler, and expert in many things. And she's talking to us today about impact, mindful traveling, being conscious about our impact when we travel. Welcome back, Sarah.
Thanks, Toby. Yeah, so just to follow up, and for you guys who are maybe just coming in to watch here on Instagram, so we're doing Instagram and Facebook. You can also find us on YouTube and through NuMundo. We're talking about carbon offsetting, the impact of travel, conscious consumption, in particular, like how do we stay really hyper mindful that we're active participants in our lives and that we're not victims and bystanders to, government and different organizations, specifically corporations, that dictate a lot of how our lives function. And so we're talking a little bit about carbon offsetting and how, there's large organizational forms of carbon offsetting, and then there's also carbon offsetting for the individual, which we're going to get to in a little bit. We also talked a little bit about transitional ethics. So if you're just tuning in again, this concept of transitional ethic is one from permaculture, which believes that there is a graceful descent away from our dependence on non-renewable resources. And what are non-renewable resources? They are resources that are finite, so things like minerals, things like fossil fuels, that the conditions that the earth had when those resources were created will never be created again in our lifetimes and possibly hundreds of thousands of lifetimes to come, realistically, when we think about it. And so, when we think about renewable resources and switching into this concept of renewable resource, it really goes into like, well, what is even a renewable resource? And that is a resource, something like my bamboo cutlery right here, which renews itself over a reasonable period of time without any non-renewable input. And so something like bamboo, something like even cotton, when done organically, small scale, in a polyculture system, can be a renewable resource as well. And so we're talking about like traveling and how our options for travel are predominantly based in non-renewable systems. And so these non-renewable systems would be like flying, would be possibly using coal with things like trains, which they don't do anymore really. Trains are more kind of electric based. And what's really neat about using like electric, like when you go into some cities, especially European cities, there's a lot of electric buses, electric cars, car sharing, ride sharing, all that kind of stuff is a great way to reduce some of your, your carbon impact. Although knowing that in certain cities, like for example, if you're traveling in France, a lot of your energy is most likely coming from nuclear, and so that has its own controversies around it as well. And then some of like the more righteous ways or less impactful ways that people are traveling now as well are by ship or by bicycle, and so I have friends who've ridden across country, the US in particular, multiple times. There is a hippie horse caravan in Mexico that every year like caravans through Mexico on horseback. There are people, and people who are sailing. And so these are
I want to add one more. There are people walking. Our Facebook Live interview last week was with a woman who's currently walking across the US. So if you missed that one, be sure to check it out. It's on our video page.
So this is kind of silly and we'll see who gets it. But what came to me right away was, and I was running. Do you remember Forrest Gump?
I think people will pick that up.
I'm a dork. Just think about that. So I mean, like our human bodies can get us pretty far, and when we even think about like the evolution of humanity, I mean, like we were on foot for a long time, and then we domesticated animals, and that took us further, and then we started really cutting down trees, and that took us even further, so it's like, sadly, deforestation has fueled the development of human society. And so, it's like this way of looking at like, well, how can we bring some of that back into balance, but still really enjoy the world, and I think, we've been talking so much about bioregionalism, and I think with traveling, it has this other concept, which is actually like an economic concept, but we can apply it this way too, called internationalization. And so it's different than globalization, because globalization is the economic, free trade that we have currently, which is, demoralizing bioregional systems. Whereas internationalization in particular, like looking at like, what are the relationships between different countries? What are the relationships between the flavors and the different kinds of capital that all these different bioregions have, and how can we really, how can we highlight them, really bring them, into a place of power without debilitating the system. So there's many different ways, I was thinking about like carbon offsetting and all of this, and we think about like, reforestation or afforestation, which is where afforestation in particular is putting trees in new places where trees have never been or have not been for many, many, many generations, where reforesting is replanting deforested areas. So I think like when we think about our individual impact, there is that option of actively working for reforestation projects, donating to them. The smaller scale, the better. There's various ones, like in Costa Rica, where I am a full-time resident. We have Costas Verdes. We also have community carbon trees. We're going live on Facebook sometime soon too. As well as just the individual impact of people planting trees in their own backyard. And then there's like the impact of our consumer purchases through this, because our dollars, our euros, our colones, our yen, our rubles, like whatever your pesos, quetzales, like whatever you're purchasing in is a direct vote for what you believe in, and so because of globalization, a lot of our direct votes go to large scale corporations that are mining industries, essentially. And I'm not talking about just like mining minerals, but we're also talking about mining, human labor, human spirit, talking about minerals, talking about forests, talking about soil. I mean, there's so many animals, and really treating the earth as just a resource that we can take from, and so like a way to kind of shift away from that for the individual impact is taking it bioregionally. And so like as travelers, when we show up into a new place, it's like being hyper mindful of that consumption, and that making sure that like, okay, I'm not from here, but how can I keep my cash in this bioregion, so it's like I'm not going to go to like a new country and start going to a big box store, like really thinking about like small boutiques, like, because when we shop, it's like, why are some of the reasons why we go to countries? A lot of times, it's to experience cultural flavor, and cultural flavor is food. Cultural flavor is also style, it's experiences, it's jewelry, it's home goods, it's all these different things. Like, for those of us who like that kind of eclectic feel, we'll go and like consume and bring back with us to our bioregions. And so, it's like going to not just like the farmer's market for your food, but I also love like when I show up in a new place, finding like, when is the flea market? Like where is all the cool vintage stuff? I love going to places that are often called like charity shops. They're essentially, we have them in the US too, things like Salvation Army, of course, but there's various kinds of charity shops, like if you're in Europe or around different places, salvage stores for different kinds of jewelry or leather goods or shoes or homewares, so those kinds of things. And so what we're doing when we're purchasing that way is that, or small boutiques, or things that are fair trade. And fair trade doesn't have to have fair trade certified on it. Just remember that like fair trade certification is another organization where a lot of that money gets diluted, and fair trade certified just means that it's going to the owner of the business, not necessarily getting to the people. And so it's really important to do a lot of research. And so like before I go traveling anywhere, I'll like look up, one of my favorite travel resources actually for those kinds of things is a site and an app called Culture Trip. I don't know if you know it, but it's female owned, and it's a traveler's website that'll be like, okay, like here are all of the cool vintage stores in this town. This is all of where the organic restaurants, those kinds of things. And so that's always what I look up. And so like, again, how can I keep my currency in the bioregion that I'm in for the first time?
And then
you know,
before we went live the first time, we were also talking about how it's not just how you consume or where you put your money, but also how much you consume.
yes, yes, how much you consume. And this takes me into like the concept of the R's. So growing up, we grew up with like reduce, reuse, recycle, and that was like the moniker for being a beginner environmentalist, and knowing that like those are just three solutions for very dynamic problems, and there is no one solution. It's like everything needs to be complementary, it needs to be integrated, and thinking about, again, top down and bottom up, and like how can we merge these together. And so the R's, when we go through them, the very first one is like reevaluation and respect. So one is like really respecting, like, okay, who is being affected, what is being affected, which bioregion, what is the reality of the people's lifestyles here, what is their cultural heritage, how am I going to go into this place and not just be a ravenous consumer or a spectator, or someone who's exploiting, but like how can I really respect this culture, the land, and the items that I'm purchasing or taking into my body. And then reevaluation is like, do I really need it? And so with consumption in particular, we like to criticize consumption, but the reality is right now, everyone take a nice deep breath. We're consuming, it's like everything is consuming constantly as it's also giving back. And in the natural systems, it's constantly feeding each other. Whereas like our human consumption often is to feed something within us that isn't being satisfied. So whether it's sadness, whether it's anger, whether it's low self-esteem, is, and we look at like media terrorism, and really like, if anyone's been to, Times Square in New York City, it's just like all around you is media terrorism. You like can't get away from, ads everywhere you look. I mean, even in your social feeds too, there's a ton of ads. And so it's like when we look at that, like it's trying to tell us that we need something that we may not actually need. And so it's that reevaluation again of like, what are my needs and my wants? And really get clear on what your needs are, and are they actually needs or they wants? Like food, water, connection, shelter, those are needs that everyone has. It's like the wants then be like, oh, my pretty little butterfly earrings from a butterfly sanctuary that fell off, a dead butterfly, from Costa Rica, supporting this woman from the Feria Verde who is really cool, and I like her, and every time I go there I chit chat with her and I buy earrings, as gifts. And so it's like these are wants, these aren't needs of mine. They make me feel beautiful, they make me feel great, but it's like that reevaluation of like, okay, what is this that's happening right now? And then another R that we have would be then to retain, right? Like really, like if we're gonna retain and actually refuse. And so first it's like, okay, I've reevaluated, I've thought about it, and I'm like, you know what, I don't need it right now. And it's okay. I don't need it, or I'm gonna like really maybe think about it more, see what my other options are. And then with retain, it means like, let's hold on to it as long as possible. And so like one of the first steps for anyone looking to journey down the environmentalist path is this right here. Get yourself these. So invest in gear that's gonna last. Things like that are renewable as well, so it's bamboo cutlery. So we have this concept in permaculture of source to sink. And so source would be where the raw material comes from to the time that it exits the system, right? And like, what is the journey that your possible, like we'll pretend that this is a plastic fork, but say this is a plastic fork, the journey and the impact that it was to get that petroleum out of the ground into factories, the human lives that are affected, the water systems, the air quality, everything that's being affected along the way, for that single-use plastic fork to do this for 5 to 20 minutes and then throw it away. It's like that right there is what we call a direct source to sink. And so by using renewable resources, basic things like reusable, right? There's another R, reusable cutlery is elongating the distance from source to sink, because eventually this fork, it's even starting to break. It's been all over with me. even this fork will eventually make it back to soil. And the beautiful thing about this fork is that it will become soil again. It is carbon-based, right? And so this is actually a form of carbon sequestration as well. And so like when we were talking about carbon sequestration, for those of you who are tuning in right now, carbon sequestration is getting it out of the atmosphere and back into biological systems and living organisms that are going to hold the CO2 within their structures. And so it could be trees, it could be soil, it could be deep ocean sink, it could be peat bogs. When I talk about deep ocean sink, I'm talking about the floor of the ocean holds carbon. And so, you know, retaining and really taking care of the things that you have. You know, we live in this throwaway society where it's like it gets a little hole, get rid of it, get a new one, you know, and that right there is just like fueling the wheel of negative consumption. And again, consumption isn't bad. We are all consuming right now as we're speaking. We are consuming the sun, we are consuming air. I am consuming this delicious yerba mate with local organic honey and all other kinds of good stuff. And, you know, and so consuming is not bad. Another R then would be refusing, you know, and I'm sorry, not refusing, but reducing. So less, like, okay, so yes, I want this beautiful shirt that I found, or I want this beautiful handbag, or I want to be drinking yerba mate, you know, knowing that like yerba mate right now is coming from, you know, the other side of the equator. Like there is a carbon impact right now in me drinking my fair trade organic yerba mate that comes from my brother-in-law's company, you know? And so it's really like, okay, that's that reevaluation, reducing maybe like, okay, I'm going to drink a little bit less. I know about the journey that it takes to get it into my human body. With retaining and then comes along the concept of repairing, like learning how to fix things. And before you even buy something, really thinking about like, are there parts to replace it? Do people know how to fix it? And this isn't the case in a lot of our appliances, electronics. You know, these are created with this concept of planned obsolescence. They are meant to break. And this is, again, fuel for the wheel of negative consumerism. And so with repair, it's like little things like learning how to sew or fixing. You know, like I have some shoes, I just got a new heel put on them. You know, so instead of like wearing the shoe heel down and being like, oh, I need new boots, you know, it's like just go get the heel fixed. And those kinds of things, polish them up real nice. It's like having an almost brand new pair of boots, you know. And with repairing, or the next concept called repurposing, repurposing is also referred to as upcycling. And so repairing is fixing it. Repurposing is using it for something that it wasn't originally intended. And so, for example, that plastic fork. And so that plastic fork that had all of that impact to come in to be used for 5 to 10 minutes for you to eat your food, to then just go into landfill. The repurposing of that fork, like say you just keep using it, the tines break off of it, and so then instead maybe you stick it into your pot of soil and you use it, you know, to label what your plant is, or you find another way to, you know, repurpose that item. You can also find this a lot in clothing. You know, it's like we can fix the clothing, we can also repurpose clothing. You can make them into like shirts, into shopping bags, into purses, into animal beds. There's all different kinds of ways that you can get really creative to like repurpose things where it doesn't look like you know, 7-year-old art project.
You can plant flowers in old boots. That was the first thing that popped into my head when you're talking about your boots.
Totally. That, I love doing that. Like at Pinsamona, at the farm I'm part of, like for many, many years on the Caribbean of Costa Rica, like old rubber boots that are no longer you know, effective for keeping your feet dry and safe. We'll start planting in those as well. We actually had old toilets that we plant in also, so it's pretty fun. And then with repurposing or, you know, repairing things is the idea of reclamation or retro, you know. And so it's like everything doesn't always have to be new, especially when we think about clothing in particular. There are so many clothes out there. It is one of the dirtiest industries known. You know, like a lot of people don't even think about it because they don't want to like acknowledge, but it's dirty in so many ways. Not even from, you know, cotton being the largest consumer of agrochemicals over corn and over soy, actually, which is mind-blowing to a lot of people. They don't like to know that. But cotton is devastating to the land. A lot of fibers that we wear are also synthetic. And so, you know, in then little microfibers into the environment in various ways through water into the soil. And so by using like reclaiming or going retro would be to be buying used clothes, you know, so going to like charity shops, vintage stores, flea markets. Those are the first things that I look up because I love clothing. I love fashion. Like that's one of my reasons I like to travel is for that, you know, to experience like that kind of cultural flavor. I like color, I like weird patterns, you know, those kinds of things. And so before I even land in any city and I'm like doing my research about the place that I'm going, one of the first things I look for are like best vintage shops, where are the charity shops, where are the flea markets, and that's where you're going. And your currency is then going directly into the hands of a, you know, like a human being that owns that boutique, that human being who owns that table at the farmer's market, that human being who, you know, is, you know, running the charity shop, or the person who's receiving the charity on their side versus, you know, box stores or larger kind of shops that you'll find in certain cities, you know. On the other hand, with reclaiming, like it could also go into thinking about like metals and woods and home goods and all of that. And, you know, back to planned obsolescence, is the stuff that was made decades ago is often much higher quality than the stuff that's made now, you know, because everything that's made now is made to break to fuel corporations. The final R then that we have would be regeneration or regenerate. And so, you know, the opposite of denigrate. So denigrate would be to, you know, destroy, whereas regenerate, so gen, like to make alive again. And so it's like, okay, to regenerate the system, organic food is one of the first things that you can do. Slow food, and so small farmers who are operating polyculture systems. And so that means that it's not just large scale organic farming, and that it's people who are farming very small, little, smaller scale, many different crops that are really building up soil. That's like one of the first things. Regeneration is also coming into a place, like for example, you know, you and I, Toby, we've talked about Guatemala a lot through these past few webinar episodes, is that, you know, like we go to Guatemala because of the culture there, because it's beautiful, because the land's beautiful. We go there because textiles, you know, a lot of people love Guatemalan textiles, but the reality is that some Guatemalan textiles, a lot of Guatemalan textiles are made in factories, Chinese owned factories. And so the regeneration would be like, okay, who is making this? And let's bring that livelihood back to this family who is weaving this particular look, you know, on the small scale. And like, we're really helping to build up, you know, the culture again, helping to regenerate the culture. And it's not just a consumer based culture for the tourists coming in, but it's like really like, let's honor in a deeper way, you know?
Sarah, we've touched on so many things, and I know sometimes people who are considering their impact or want to consume mindfully, want to travel mindfully, might feel overwhelmed because it's so many things to think about when we break it down to the particulars. So if you could sum it up in sort of an overarching thought pattern to offer people, do you think, would you be able to sum it up in that way?
Your brain's like, blah! So, for those of you watching on Instagram, I don't know if you can hear Toby super well. I hope you can. You know, she was saying like, there's so much going on here, and how can I maybe sum all this up? I think a lot of it goes into the R of re-evaluation, you know, and really considering what is your intention. Like every step that you put on the ground is intentional, or it should be intentional, you know, like because there's something that is being touched, impacted with every step that you take, you know, whether it's, you know, the microorganism being crushed beneath your foot, or it's the purchase of this hair tie, you know, and like who's being affected right now. Like be intentional and really thinking about the needs and the wants and why, you know, we're doing this, and why are we, because we're talking about travel today in particular, you know, like why are we traveling? And I know like for me, I travel because I'm a student of the world. That's like the biggest thing for me, is I really love to learn. I'm also a permaculture teacher. And so one of the criticisms that traveling permies do receive is like, well, if you're, mindful of your carbon, input, your carbon impact. Like, shouldn't you just stay home? And for me, as a permaculture teacher and also as an herbalist, it's like doing webinars like this and lives and stuff is really, really great because we can reach a lot of people. But it's a one-on-one experience. It's a human to human and a human to earth and a human to plant experience that needs to happen. And so me being in my transitional ethic, I am still traveling. I have minimized the amount of travel that I do for the most part. Like, I'm pretty based in Costa Rica. I live there about 10 months a year, based in that country, traveling around a little bit from project to project. And then, in the North American summers, Costa Rican winters, I do get out of the country a little bit and want to venture around because I'm trying to broaden my worldview, so I can be a more effective teacher, so I can speak from more experience, so I can speak from, not just the intellectual book reading, but I can say, this is what I've seen with my own eyes, and this is what I've experienced with my own body, with my own heart, and that to me is really important. And so again, my transitional ethic is like, if I'm going to be traveling right now, I need my impact when I'm there to be hyper mindful, and I need my impact when I return to be hyper effective, to the people who are coming to my classes, who are coming to my events, those kinds of things to participate is, again, I want to speak from experience. And so I think that's, how I can sum it up a little bit,
Yeah. And you said something, Sarah, that I think it's come up in all three of these webinars, and that's about asking questions, the importance of asking questions. And so I would just reinforce that, where for me, maybe we're not getting it perfect yet, and we're still in this phase of transition, but it is so critical, I think, to ask questions and to ask ourselves and the people we're engaging with what our impact is. Where did this come from? Why do I want this? Why am I traveling? And to engage with it, because when we stop asking questions and we stop caring, sort of, and that's not a place that I want to be.
No, me neither. I mean, like, to stop asking questions just leads to complacency. Complacency, it's the fatalist of and being a bystander, which then eventually leads to victimhood, which then just becomes this like really negative cycle. And, complacency for me, some people that might be their path. Maybe they have been shot down, they feel disempowered, and they become complacent that way. And I think what's so important for people to remember is that we are the dominant species on this planet. We have impacted the planet in ways that we're now, some geologists call the Anthropocene, that we're in a state of existence in our world where we have made such an impact that we're actually in a new geological epoch. I mean, that's huge. When you really think about that, it's like, wow, this is what we have done as a species, and our individual impacts are critical, And so I think that that's the first step towards empowerment, is knowing that every step you take matters, and to be really intentional with every single thing that you do, every single thing that you say, everything that you even try to think. That's a hard one. And going into the consumption, and the reasons why we're doing things. It's like, okay, what is my intention? And really sit with that, like, of course it's to explore, to see beautiful new things, but go a little bit deeper and constantly ask that question. And thinking about like the individual impact, that we can have, the basic kind of things. So to leave people, because we're probably coming to some time now, to end this webinar, but some of the basic kind of things that people can do for your own kind of carbon sequestration strategies would be, or to carbon offset, thinking about that, is when we go into a new bioregion, is go to national parks, pay for national parks. It's like a lot of the national parks are working really hard to sustain wildlife, or communal parks, municipal parks, not just national, state parks, those kinds of things. But it's like, go to them and pay to be there. It's okay. It's like sometimes, but land's free and land has no borders and all of that. It's like, yes, that's true. But at the same time, these are people who are actively trying to care, doing the best that they can with the resources that they have, you know, to keep the trees, to keep the bioregions healthy, to keep the animals safe, you know. And so really thinking about supporting them. Something else, like from the consumer side impact, is actually buying local honey. You know, like when you go somewhere, support beekeepers. Like one of the most important things that we can do is keep the bee populations healthy. And the way that we do that is by making sure that the people who are tending them are also in a livelihood where they can thrive and not just survive. Some people really like this concept of like voluntourism. And so like if you want to go and do voluntourism, you know, you could, you know, there's like the bigger organizations like Habitat for Humanity and those kinds of things, which do really good work. That build houses, not necessarily using ecological materials, but it is really helping with the concept of people care, which is one of the core ethics of permaculture. But, you know, some of the things that you can do in your travel is doing some work on organic farms or working for the soil, you know. And if you're looking for educational opportunities, like voluntourist kind of opportunities like that, you can go to the NuMundo website and you'll find all the different impact centers like around the globe that they're participating in, and see like, how can I give back? And so it's like you're getting to experience a different kind of lifestyle, you're getting to experience a different kind of culture. Maybe you're going to be learning a language, a new bioregion, but you're also actively putting your hands in the ground and really working towards that. For some of us traveling, one of the things that comes up that people will ask, well, like, what if the water is not good? You know, and my only option is to buy bottled water. I actually don't think that that's an option. I don't buy bottles. I don't buy bottles at all. Water, like even if I'm in a country where the water is super sketchy, like somewhere like Guatemala, where 90% of the water has waste in it, talking about fecal waste in the water, and this is because the infrastructure is not put in to take care of the water. And so, you know, in Guatemala, I don't buy bottles. And so what I do is I travel with my giant clean canteens, and I boil my water and I drink tea. You know, like one of my individual consumption strategies is that I invest in products that are going to last me, that are going to stay out of the landfill system. And so, you know, like when I go into countries like Guatemala, like I will make sure that I'm staying somewhere where I have access to a kitchen to boil my water. And if you bring water to a boil for 10 minutes, a rolling boil for 10 minutes, you killed pathogens. You know, you can also invest, if you like, in something like a life straw or a life straw water bottle, which is like a carbon filter, which does eventually run out. You can filter, you know, like 50,000 liters of water with them, depending on where you are. So it's really looking at like, okay, what is my impact? Because when we're touristing, when we're traveling, you know, countries support these industries for economic growth. And so think about countries like Guatemala, countries like Italy, countries like, you know, Morocco, Egypt, like Thailand, like all Bali, like all these places that we go, people talk about Bali belly, you know, because the infrastructure is not there. And so people buy bottled water. But think about all the tourists, right? So like a country or an island, like Bali, which has a population of, I think it's the population similar to Costa Rica, something like 4 million people, but they get 4 million tourists a year. And so think about 4 million tourists buying a plastic bottle of water every day, you know, and not refilling it because they don't want to get Bali belly. And so that impact is huge. And by you being one of those 4 million people who's walking around with one of these, you know, like your impact right there is majorly reductive and very, very important. People think this is, it's just like a little thing. It's like, no, it's not just a little thing. All the little things, like they exponentially add up when we're all doing it. So it's always having your gear, you know, and just setting yourself, like my core value is I refuse single-use plastic. And that is just like it's your core value system, and stick with it. It doesn't need to be judgy of other people doing it. You know, like I will be sitting there sometimes, like eating with my bamboo fork while everyone else is eating their plastic, or I just won't even buy something, you know, and like maybe I'll take a sip, but like off of someone else's stuff, but I don't buy it myself. So we already mentioned it, and we've mentioned it a bunch of times, you know, but really when you get into a new bioregion is eating the seasonal food. You know, like that to me is some of the most exciting things that we can do is seeing like what is fresh, what is in season, and let's support the small farmers. And so it goes back into like the slow food movement, like really like from soil to plate, like where is it coming from and who is being affected. And again, you know, like the chain stores versus local boutiques, flea markets, charity shops, and vintage stores, that also is going to majorly lessen, you know, your carbon impact and increase, you know, your positive impact on local economy.
Thank you, Sarah. We are just about out of time. So if you're tuning in now or later and your interest is piqued about traveling consciously, you can get started with NuMundo's upcoming Conscious Travel Academy. There's a link to that in the video description to your right. And if you would like to learn more from Sarah, she is launching a webinar series. Why don't you tell us more about it, Sarah?
Yeah. So I am one of the contributors for the Conscious Travel Academy, talking specifically about doing your travel first aid kit. And so you can find these videos that we've done in this 3-part webinar series on YouTube, through NuMundo's website. You can go to their Facebook. You can link up through your Instagram if you're watching me here on Instagram at the same time, simultaneous streaming. You can go to my website, which is villagewitch.org, to find some of this info as well about the Conscious Travel Academy, and that's going to be launching July 1st, correct?
Correct.
July 1st, nice. And that's also when my webinar is going to be launching, is on July 1st. And so it is going to be a 6-part live series. There are 2 series, so there's one in July, July 1st to the 12th, every Monday. You can also then do the second series if you can't make the first one, which is going to be August 19th into September, can't remember the date. And it's going to be a 6-part series looking at permaculture for the herbalist path. And so for those of you who know me or don't know me, one of my jams is permaculture for the herbalist path, which is a holistic perspective on the integrated critical relationship between human ecology and global ecology, the world around us, and how we are a part of the world and not separate from it, specifically from the perspective of the herbalist with the foundation of permaculture. And so it's a 28-day immersive course that I'll be hosting in Guatemala this coming September at Atitlan Organics, and then again in Costa Rica at the Punta Mona Center on the Caribbean side of Costa Rica. But for those of you who can't take 28 days, this is a 12-hour series that will be live, so you can ask questions. It'll be recorded. It's through Zoom, so you will have access, or you're going to have access to handouts, to PowerPoints, those kinds of things. And we're going to be doing a review on permaculture for the herbalist path, looking at forest ecology as human ecology, talking about herbal energetics and formulations, talking about the ethics and principles of permaculture and how it relates to human wellness, planetary wellness. And you can do 1 class, 2 class, all 6. And if you sign up for all 6, you actually get a free constitutional assessment and herbal protocol from me. So you can find that on my website too, which is villagewitch.org, or on the NuMundo website is the platform that I'm using for you to register.
And we'll post all of those links in the comments on this video, so you can find them there. Great.
Thank you so much, Toby. I appreciate your time again. And for those of you on Instagram who aren't seeing beautiful Toby, you can find her, Toby in the World, through Instagram or through NuMundo. You can find her on Facebook, on YouTube, and so this is Toby Israel again. She is Toby in the World.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone in our NuMundo family for hanging out with us. If you're watching this later, you have a question, just leave it in the comments and Sarah or I will check on that later.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Toby.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.